The Underground, Ideas into Action presents an Underground Chat, where we bring the underground conversation to you. Today's chat, the full potential of our mission, with Lucy Ito, President and CEO of the National Association of State Credit Union Supervisors.
All right, so let's start with, I always start with, how is the family and how are your parents? How's Rob? How are you doing?
Yeah, we are actually doing very well. I have to say that for us, the silver lining during this 2020, whether it's COVID or it's the social unrest, the silver lining for us has been that we've been together. I started at NASCUS 5.5 years ago, and so this is definitely 6 months now, the longest that we have been together continuously. Certainly in 5.5 years, but probably even longer than that because we both travel for work. So before, when I was with the leagues in California, Nevada, and also with the World Council, I traveled so much that this has really been a wonderful time for Rob and me to not only be together, but be together during this trying time and be able to try and parse what's going on, understand what's going on. When we've been hit with these things that have just bowled us over. So.
Yeah, and I did all that because we've traveled our whole life as well on a professional level for Mike and I, and we're also together and having to navigate, if you will, even something as simple as grocery shopping and the things that you do on a day-to-day basis. He teases that we've been together more in the last 6 months than we have been our entire marriage. So
yeah, I can relate. And then my extended family, my mother is 91, and so we've been very careful with her, and she's living with one of my sisters, and so we go visit, but we are extremely careful. And I do think that what this time has done is made us, even those of us who are already very close to our families, I just see more families spending time together and slowing down, which I think has been really healthy.
You're absolutely right. We actually, when this all first happened and we quarantined, I wrote letters to my grandchildren. And they wrote me back, and they were actually anxious to get to the mailbox. And they're just maybe some core values that we've, thought about again and communicated. So that's amazing. Well, now when we go to, you're active, like you just mentioned, you've been active on a local basis, you've been active on a, state, nationwide, globally. As you look to the future, what do you think the vulnerable collaboration is going to look like, the cooperative movement? How is that shifting out there?
So interesting, Sue, when I saw that term, vulnerable collaboration, in the questions that you shared with me, it's the first time I've actually heard that expression. I was really struck by it, and I feel strongly that when we let ourselves be vulnerable, and when we let others see us being vulnerable, that is a huge strength. And so I was really stunned actually to see the expression, and I immediately said, "Wow, that's exactly what we need." And then coincidentally, yesterday I was on a call with the CUNA COVID-19 task force, which has quite a few people on it. One of the people on there is Troy Stang, and he used the expression yesterday when we were talking about trying to come up with solutions and whatnot. And his expression was unexpected partners. And I was thinking, vulnerable collaboration, letting yourself be vulnerable, allows you to think of partners you might not think of otherwise. And unexpected partnerships leads to breaking out of our old mold, coming up with new ideas. And so I found that both your term, vulnerable collaboration, and his notion of unexpected partners, I just think it's very powerful, and that's what we need right now to not be selfish. We're in this together. Fortunately, that's historically when credit unions thrive, when faced with adversity, and that's, I think, when we find these unusual connections or think of things we wouldn't have otherwise thought of.
It's interesting. We talked about Maslow's hierarchy at our last underground, and we talked about the life stages where people go through. And that's when we, from an underground standpoint, started talking about vulnerable collaboration, because the idea when we get together, as you know, because you've been part of the underground voice for a while, we're looking for ways to describe how important it is to keep conversations going and to have conversations that sometimes we don't want to have on the main stage. But now we have this virtual platform that the reality is that we can get our message out in a new way. And like you said, unexpected partnerships. I mean, where are they going to come from, and how can we continue to build on that?
And that's something I've really admired about underground. The history of the underground has been to bring uncomfortable topics out and provide a comfortable, safe setting for people to feel that they can be candid.
Yeah, and we've been doing that from the standpoint of, you have those type of conversations, and you ask people to share what they're thinking. One of the things I've admired about you since we first met is you're such a good listener. And in order to have, we talk about empathy today, and we talk about the type of leadership that's required, emotional intelligence, and listening is one of those skills. And so I just want you to know that you're thoughtful when you respond, because you've really listened to what people are saying. So it's.
Thank you for saying that. I try, but I'm not always the best listener. So that's something I continue to work on.
Well, patience is something that we're all trying to navigate right now. So when we talk about health, and we talk about right now, there's financial health, there's physical health, there's the mental health, and what's taking place across the country. I'm looking at it from a longer term. And to frame it a little bit, I think all of us went into the pandemic with the thought that we would have a start and finish. And so, as you indicated when we were talking, you thought you'd be going back to DC and so on. So I didn't really think of an extended period of time. Now I'm looking at it as, how do we navigate moving forward, and not just a new norm, but here we have lessons that we've learned during this period. And what will that do with consumers and ultimately with credit unions? What are your thoughts?
Well, at the consumer level, when I think about what we're going through, I tend to first think about, wow, I worry particularly about already vulnerable populations. So certainly the elderly, the terminally ill, children, especially with what's going on with their interrupted education. And then, again, look at, wow, with all the well-intentioned forbearance measures that have gone on at the federal and state level, well-intentioned, but how are credit unions and other financial institutions going to cope with this on the other side? And, before I talk about credit unions, I did want to note that along with the worrying about the negative, seeing the financial stress that leads to crime, leads to suicide, leads to kind of new violence that we're observing, witnessing. So it's easy to think about just the negative, but the positives, we already talked about. I do think most families have slowed down, and whether it's families, couples, or bigger social groups, I do think it's been great that, whereas before COVID, we probably all had really packed work and social lives, having that downtime has been very healthy. So that's all good. And I do observe that I'm seeing some folks, previously we reacted to things. We were so busy, we just reacted. And now it seems like people are doing things with more intention. So that's kind of, consumer level, that's what I see. For credit unions, I may have already mentioned that historically credit unions have shown that they thrive during crisis. Or U.S. credit unions started before the Depression, but really got their really became uh, an American nationwide phenomenon during the Great Depression. And every time we've had a crisis, credit unions have responded, whether it's a big crisis like we have now or many local ones. So that's great. But you think about, for credit unions, all the cost and burden associated with just this adjusting to everything that's going on. That worries me, right? We're going to have, everyone sees a consolidation in the system, accelerating, mergers accelerating. And you think about CEOs and boards of directors, and they're justifiably tired. It's just so much to handle. I was on the same call that I was on yesterday. Gigi Hyland made this observation that credit unions have always been great at short-term solutions for a problem, and they've been doing that now. So now, the way that you put it, we thought that there was going to be a beginning and an end, and now it's so extended. How are credit unions going to cope with those long-term challenges that are ahead? And I think it takes us back to what you raised: vulnerable collaboration and unexpected partners. And I mean, this is so new to us, so elongated. We are going to have to be creative in ways that we weren't challenged to in the past.
I want to go off in a direction here for just a minute, because I think that when we talk about unexpected partners, we think in terms of our business partners, we think in terms of our community partners and so on. But one of the areas for me that's also a very important partner, as noted just now, is going to be our regulators, is going to be the role that you're playing to support this movement, because we are seeing unprecedented deposit growth. We are seeing an awareness, a trusted partner when it comes to a consumer a member with their credit union. And so as we navigate this, I've been very impressed by how the regulators, as evidenced by all of you coming together, the trades associations and so on, have taken that role. Do you want to share any thoughts about that?
That's so interesting, Sue. So before I arrived at NASCUS, in my credit union league role and World Council role, I had always dealt with regulators. But what became very clear to me after joining NASCUS is how alike regulators and credit union people are, in that there is this purpose of doing the right thing, protecting consumers, making sure consumers' money is safe. And so I find it fascinating that even though credit unions and regulators in an examination situation might be on two sides of the table, that actually at their core, they're very aligned in trying to look out for consumers. So I find it fascinating that you make that observation also. And I just got off a call before this one today, where we're talking about the future of virtual examination, and the call had both regulators and credit unions on it. And I don't think it'll surprise you that not only do the regulators, of course, everyone sees the value of off-site exams and minimizing the burden on-site, but not only the regulators, but also the credit unions are going, they don't want exams to go 100% virtual. When we're out of this, they're saying, no, it's we work on exams together, and the credit unions want that chance to talk with their regulators face to face, just like the regulators want to be able to look the credit unions in the eye. So I find it interesting. It's just a very symbiotic relationship. And one of the credit unions on the call today actually said to the regulators that, we're in this together. It's like we safe and sound credit unions is good for the entire system. And so, I do think there's a natural affinity between regulators and credit unions.
An extension of that, obviously, is that makes it good for the consumer. That makes us have a financial alternative when people are all working together to solve the core needs. And I believe strongly that everyone deserves a credit union and deserves access to it. And so the idea that you're seeing that collaboration is so critical. And you mentioned something that I want to explore as well, and that's that we're in this virtual world and we're social distance, and we're looking at what that's going to mean from a long-term perspective. But diversity and our intention of reaching everyone is something that we have to be mindful of. And given today's circumstances and what we're seeing, I believe that we're going to need, with what's happening with the DEI collective and the fact that people are rising up together within the credit union movement and reaching out. How do you think the credit union mission will evolve given these circumstances?
Yeah, interesting. Very, very interesting question. First, I was thinking, if the credit union mission is people helping people, then I don't think the mission of credit unions is going to change so much as how credit unions fulfill their mission. So, on DEI itself, and kudos to the underground. At least 2 years, more than 2 years before our current awakening as a nation, the underground was raising questions about diversity. So kudos to you all for that. And it's now at least we're talking about it, and not only talking about it, some people have been talking about it for a long time, but more people are talking about it. And I know there's this impatience of, we're hearing the right talk right now, but what are we doing? And I think it's going to take time. It's going to take baby steps and giant steps, a combination of them. And, we'll see what happens with credit unions. I think when you look at employees of credit unions, overall, I think there's pretty good diversity in employees. And then in membership, it really depends on, where you are. But the dialogue that we had a couple years ago at the underground, my frustration back then is, I think I made the comment that I was frustrated that credit union membership did not look like at least the America that I know. And I've been thinking about that more. And I was trying to think, okay, when you've got different kind of established employee groups, you see lots of different employer groups reaching credit unions, and those members knowing about them, those consumers knowing about credit unions. But I was trying to think in my everyday life, I go to the dry cleaners, when back in DC, riding taxis, riding Uber. And I always ask, whenever I'm in some kind of situation like that, you just get to know people and they want to know what you do. So they ask about credit unions or what I do. And then they go, well, what's a credit union? I'm struck at how many people in small businesses and employees of those small businesses don't know about credit unions, or the self-employed taxi drivers or Uber drivers. How many just don't know about a credit union? So I've been trying to think, how do we get those consumers exposed, aware of credit unions? And even though I'm a big proponent, I do think dealing with the future that credit unions and regulators both need to think about expanding fields of membership to protect credit unions, could create diversity for safety and soundness reasons. But it made me think, I wonder, how do we help credit unions measure not only the expansion of their field of membership, but how deeply within their existing field of membership are they going? Have they really tapped the full potential of their field of membership? I don't have good answers for this, but it's making your question has made me think about both the breadth and the depth of one's field of membership.
And we're in a position right now where virtual could help us with that. When we when we first ran into the idea of how do you continue the underground voice, we were planning on colliding with World Council's conference in July. And we polled our people that are engaged, and we talked a little bit about it. And there was this conversation about, well, it's the intimacy, it's being in person that really makes a difference. And we thought about that, and then we thought, how do you take the intimate conversation and make it in a virtual world where literally we can talk about credit unions, we can talk about how special they are, and we can talk about the fact that conversations like this are taking place. And what's interesting is that we ended up with a few hundred on the event, that day, but we have tens of thousands of views now, because the conversation continues. And that's one of the powers of the positive, back to optimism and opportunities, is I think we have an opportunity right now to capture the heart of the credit union movement in a different way. Not necessarily in just saying, hey, we love it, we're people helping people, but really demonstrating, people like yourself, and how you've paid attention to this for a while, and you've cared about diversity for a while, and you've committed your life to having an impact on people around the world. And we don't have that same thing coming from payday lenders, or even commercial banks and things of that sort. So I just find that we have a rare opportunity right now, and maybe it's going to be a hybrid, but it's the idea that we can expand our audience.
I totally agree with you. And, I was thinking the same. You put it much better than I did, that, I do worry not only about traditional competition for banks, and competition is good, but I do worry about fintechs and new entrants into the market, and what's going to happen with more traditional depository institutions like credit unions. And so I do think, as some consumers leave traditional credit unions or traditional banks, that there's certainly others out there who don't have as much of a connection to what I might call mainstream financial institutions. So there's definitely an opportunity there. But also, looking at now the future virtualization, digitization of everything, clearly the crisis has accelerated all of that. And it makes me wonder, how credit unions and regulators keep up with that. So as more savvy and perhaps younger as more savvy and younger consumers are comfortable with not a financial institution, but conducting all their financial transactions online, I wonder what happens as financial transactions become more electronic, and let's say somewhere out there with a non-traditional provider, money gets lost. Who's responsible for that? I can see the world going to digital options. We all find it convenient, but what happens if people stop using credit unions and banks for savings, and they've got their money stored in different, I don't want to name actual businesses, but online providers, and a transaction goes awry, some money goes missing? What does that tell us? What do we have to prepare for to offer the equivalent of deposit insurance, so that people don't lose their money in a world that's much more electronic, much more digitized? Again, I don't have any answers, but I do think both credit unions and regulators need to be thinking about what we need to do to protect consumers, protect members, whether it's their money or their personal information, how we're evolving with where clearly the world is going.
You just put the whole picture together for me, because if we go back to our conversation about intimacy within the families or within our households or communities, the idea that we're saving again. And I had my two grandsons with their little jar of money go to the credit union when it they set an appointment and they went in and they actually deposited it, and they had this emotional connection to the fact that they were making their first, and they took their picture and so on. And I'm thinking that, this generation is completely virtual right now. They're virtual school, they're virtual at, with all of their connections in a lot of ways. And yet, because we've got the pandemic and we've got this need to be safe and secure, they're learning some lessons that if we'd have just catapulted into digitization, that maybe we would have not had. So it's fascinating how you just put that, and how my brain went to, wow, it's an opportunity perhaps to create that love and belonging that we didn't have before.
And I love that story you're telling about your grandkids, and they're not going to forget that. That's going to be something they remember. It's like it makes an impression. So that's very exciting. Now I got to make sure all my nieces and nephews that I got to check with their parents and make sure that they're taking them to their credit union and opening accounts.
Yeah, write them a letter and postmark it, and be sure to do this too. Put a return envelope in there with a stamp on it. So that grandma wants to get my feedback, and auntie wants to hear from them. So I think that what we've talked about is the whole idea that people are going to need us even more, and whether it's safety, security, it's the idea of counseling, it's the idea that we trust the people that work within the movement. And our purpose with what we're having conversations about is to show that heart and to show the difference, because we also have to do the wake-up call that says, we're not going to go back, guys, so we got to figure this out.
Yeah. Well, and I meant to look up the organization that does this study every year so I could make reference to it. And of course, I forgot to do that, but I'm sure you'll know what I'm talking about. Last year in 2019 was the first time in the history of the 20 years that this research group was surveying consumers. It was the first time that bank satisfaction exceeded credit union satisfaction. And I thought that was, and the conclusion of the researchers was it was because of online digital convenience. And that doesn't surprise me at all. But I just have to believe that credit unions are going to figure it out. Maybe that's another silver lining of the pandemic and accelerating going to virtual solutions and not going to the branch, that it's making credit unions do that faster. Maybe that's one of the silver linings, that it gives credit unions this opportunity to catch up to where some other financial institutions may have been heading because of the greater resources that they have.
You're absolutely right. And I think that when we look at the seamless experience and the need to be able to use this tool and be able to have this in person, all of that, the mind, the technology, the heart, are all going to have to come together. So what ideas into action would you recommend for our audience and for me?
Well, I really struggled with this one, and we talked already about racism and social justice, and I do think that's as each day passes, I'm encouraged that I don't think it's going to be just the flavor of the year kind of thing, and that we will find ourselves a year from now still challenging ourselves and still finding solutions. And what we face today has taken place over so many years that I've got to believe that it's going to take a long time also to fix it. But something that's top of mind for me right now in the DEI context is the New York Times article that came out earlier this week about real estate home appraisals. And I've known it existed before, but to have it laid out again in so many blatant examples, and all due respect to the appraiser industry and whatnot, but there's so much bias built into the system. So that's something we need to fix. Our our appraisal system, not only for that kind of bias, but the appraisal system overall in today's day and age really needs modernizing. And I just, that tie to how different groups, especially minorities, how they end up faring in the appraisal system. Maddening, but an opportunity for us to change that.
That's a very valuable point, because unconscious bias and the idea of redlining, and we've regulated, Community Reinvestment Act, we've done some of that, but what if somebody's pulling comps and they're trying to figure it out and they're doing it based upon their own biases, that's a fascinating point.
Well, and related to that, I have to say, and especially I really agree with what you mentioned before about vulnerable collaboration and just being open to being vulnerable. Among our staff, besides the racially diverse team that we have, we're diverse in other ways that aren't so apparent. And something I've said in other settings is that I believe we need to focus right now on the injustices against the Black community. However, I also hope that this leads us to look at other communities as well. That putting ourselves out there and letting ourselves be educated, I think, is very important in talking about this.
Wow. As a result of these conversations, and going back with underground, one of the things that we've had quite a few conversations around is what is an ally and what's inclusiveness, and how do we make sure that by us having these vulnerable conversations that we don't exclude people indirectly because of our conversations. And what you just said is so important, because the other piece of it is we're all learning.
The other thing that beyond the social injustice issues that we've been talking about, just the pandemic and the crisis that we're in and will be for a while, and it's scary. Is this going to be worse than the Great Recession? And at the time, I think, when we were all undergoing that, we probably could not imagine something being worse than what we went through 10 years ago. I'm guessing that now, most of us, because we've been through at least two, that we're realizing, yeah, it's true what they say, there will be another crisis. And so I've been trying myself to journal what things I learned and observed in the last crisis, what I'm observing now, kind of compare them, what's similar, what's different about them, and hoping that better prepares me for the next crisis. And I know, I can't imagine what the next crisis will be, but I just think now is a good time for us to reflect on, we can still remember what we learned 10 years ago. Certainly we're remembering, and things are happening so fast now, they're right before us, but I just hope that we take the time to reflect, capture those, and then have those notes to go back to the next time I hate to think about it, but there will be something after this that surprises us.
What a thoughtful thing to be doing. I think it's also important because you're journaling what's taking place right now, and you're right, it is happening so quickly. So we're dealing with today, and then we go to tomorrow, and that's wonderful. So the idea of us journaling, the idea of us capturing what's taking place, is not only a learning lesson, but it's probably a good mental health opportunity as well.
It helps me.
Yeah, you know what? I actually keep a journal as well, and I have a vision board in my closet of all places, so that when I'm being dressed in the morning, I'm looking at it and I'm saying, "Shine your light and make sure you're all these things."
That's very cool.
Yeah,
I think I'll borrow that idea.
Okay, then we'll take pictures. So.